And I have to tell you, I do a lot of these things, but this one in particular I'm very excited about because it was about 25 years ago that I failed to complete the first course I was going to take toward a master's at NYU. And so this is the first time I'm back, and it feels good. You know? And to the professor of the old English class I was taking, I'm sorry. And I will point out that friends who did successfully plow through their graduate degrees did call me up and say, you started with Old English, you're actually that OCD that you were going to get a master's in English in chronological order. And actually that was true. One other brief aside, my son Jack is applying to college right now, and I notice a lot of you are from different universities. Nicholas Lurie, are you here? I live in Connecticut. Would be a really great thing for me if Jack went to UConn. Just keep an eye out. I'm just, So anyway, I'm hoping you will find this a good complement to what you were just seeing, because I'm coming from a slightly different angle, and this is essentially the talk I've been giving this year to different marketers and at different industry events around the country. And it's the conversation we're having with marketers and touches on some of the same points but kind of goes in a different direction. Forgive me, you've no doubt seen this, right? These are the St. Peter's Square pictures, but it's such a great visceral way to understand what's happening in mobile. Here's a more quantitative way to look at it. I was recently one of a few people who got to sit with Ray Kurzweil, who was talking about how he sees the world. And so many of the things he talked about were things that we understood, but he understood differently. And one of them was that he actually took the time to plot the adoption of all sorts of technologies back to the printing press. And he found something tremendously consistent, which was that every one of them was adopted at an exponential rate. And as he said, look, we all know a linear progression is 1, 2, 3, 4, and exponential progression is 1, 2, 4, 16. And as long as you're at the 4 versus 16 stage, it doesn't seem like that big a deal until you consider that the 40th step of a linear progression is 40, and the 40th step of an exponential progression is 1 trillion. And this is the grab 'em by the collar moment I'm having with a lot of marketers, which is to say, we're at the 4 to 16 moment right now, so you feel behind, but like you're going to be able to catch up. And that's not the appropriate emotion. You should be freaking out, because this is going to get away from you before you know it. And I will say, you'd be astonished how many major marketers are saying to me, well, I'll have a mobile optimized site in 18 months. And my internal monologue is saying, what's their ticker symbol again? Because I should short that. This is truly critical stuff. And it's playing out, right? We're seeing queries double across a variety of categories. And it's not just, obviously doubling is, off what base? Well, off this base. We're now at the point that we're seeing anywhere from 1 in 5 to more than half of queries coming from mobile in different categories. As well as, you'll see in the upper right, that's not about queries, that's about behaviors. And this is kind of a theme for me, that consumers are trading behaviors to these devices, and we'll come back to that in a couple of different ways. They're increasingly comfortable doing things we didn't think they would necessarily think they would do, or maybe we're finding ourselves doing things we didn't necessarily think we would do on a mobile device. So in that, with that as preface, what are the things I'm talking to marketers about? And it's 3 big topics. One is the convergence of devices. The next is the rise of context over platform as a signal. And the last is the criticality of erasing friction in the consumer journey and recognizing how we inadvertently get in our own way. So let's start at the top. You can look at convergence by plotting the devices in our lives against the frequency with which we are proximate to them and the complexity of what they do. And I will admit, I stole this idea from a slide I got on the internet from some business professor somewhere, so if you're in the room, sorry. I didn't catch the name. what we see is consumers are consistently trading up and to the right, right? Down in this corner, you've got your landline phone. How many people have disconnected their landline phone? I'd like you to call my wife. She won't let me disconnect our landline phone. She points out that her mother and my mother know that number, and I point out it's impossible they could learn another number. And by the way, the only other people who call that number are telemarketers. And I'd be okay if none of those three groups called me again. This is a trade-off so many of you are making because it's a bad deal, right? It does one thing, we're only with it some of the time. Our desktop computer's a better deal, it does lots of things, but we're still only with it some of the time, so we're happy to trade to a laptop, something that we can take all that same capability out with us. And on, we used to take an SLR and a video camera, neither of which was particularly large, but now you've got one device that does both things and is smaller than either one. And on through your games and even different kinds of phones until you eventually get to today's smartphone that does all of these things in a tiny little compartment you can have with you all the time. Here's the interesting phenomenon. This group here, just like the advent of television didn't destroy radio, it wasn't a good day for radio, but radio is still in our lives, it's just in a different place. What we're seeing in this area is consumers are moving back and forth seamlessly between these platforms. They are not making the distinctions that marketers are. Or in our context at Google, we say, if you put a laptop, a tablet, and a phone in the same context, you'll see the behaviors come together. So this is a really important concept to us, which drives us to the notion of the importance of context over platform. And by the way, a year and a half ago, we were talking about platform. And then we started to realize, wait a minute, that doesn't really play out. The whole reason I've got this gentleman skiing, well, I didn't put him there, but I've got the picture of the gentleman skiing on a sand dune, is his context matters. If you were marketing skiing-related goods, and all you knew about him was that he was a skier, you might attempt to sell him a bunch of things he doesn't need. He doesn't need a hat, gloves, scarf, right? He just needs skis, poles, boots, done. So in the same way, when I say baby, most of us think of this. But if we're honest, some of us thought of this, right? What you bring to the conversation matters. Right? At Google, we've always said we are the database of intentions. If you're searching for pizza, you're probably hungry. That's legitimate, but it turns out there's this other really powerful signal in context, because a search for pizza at 7:30 in the morning in my kitchen is probably a search for a recipe or a coupon or where can I get frozen pizza, whatever, and might be a search for a restaurant. But a search on the street at 7:30 at night is probably a search for a restaurant. So when we put those two factors together, it isn't just additive, it's multiplicative, right? Our ability to serve the right answer to that question goes way up. And in fact, not even just the right answer, but the right way for the consumer to interact. So for instance, we've got in this response a call button, and we've got a designation of the distance to the location. All of which is more relevant when you're on the street looking on a phone than when you're back at your house. So I wanted to show you a brief video about how eMart played into some of this, and we'll talk about it in a second. And again, some of you may have seen this, but it's pretty cool. Do we have volume? I didn't think to check that. We don't have video, so maybe we don't have to worry about that. All right, the video didn't work. Let me tell you what they did. They had a problem where they had sales dip in the middle of the day. And they were trying to sort out how they could make a difference in that. And what they did was they created a physical object in Seoul, in Korea, that at noon created a shadow QR code. And they promoted this, and people loved it. It was fun. It was that surprise and delight thing that marketers talk about all the time. And it actually drove sales significantly, because you could take a picture, you got a $10 off, and they dropped the goods right at your home. What this is about is one of the powers of mobile devices, which is connecting the real world to the digital world. Everybody, for a while there, was talking about augmented reality. Our chairman, Eric Schmidt, talks about augmented humanity. We are better, smarter, more capable because we have these devices with us. And this is a good example. They found a way to take the real world, make the mobile device supercharge that. Perhaps you've heard about what Meier's done with their app. So Meijer created an app that you'd put your grocery list on it. That's not a big deal. You could do that with a lot of, you could do that with Evernote. You could do that with anything. The great thing about their app is when you walk in the store, it tells you what's on special and where to find it. The really cool part is, as you walk around the store, it reorders your shopping list so that the things that are in that aisle are at the top of the list. The idea being you don't ever get to the milk and say, oh shoot, I forgot the Fritos. You know. Now this is, I will admit, squarely a first world problem, right? The I've got to double back in the grocery store problem. But, and this is my message to marketers, that's the essence of connecting to consumers. And again, I'll come back to this message a little bit later about the importance of solving a problem for the consumer. That little, I can't tell you how many audiences I've described the reordering of the list and you hear people gasp. I'm like, really? I guess they've solved all their other problems because, you know, Maslow, this is very low, you know. But it is a really cool thing, and that gets loyalty for Meijer. I'm betting this video isn't going to work either, but let's give it a shot. There you go. This is an ad from Brandesco. It's a different context, right? This is a lean-back context where you're reading, browsing. We have now learned that you can read content on a tablet like a magazine and you flip through it. And what they did was created a magazine experience that looks like you're flipping through automobile content. Only when you get to the picture of the actual car, when you go to flip the page, you propel the car into the side of the frame. And they address their message to you then, which is that unexpected things happen. Pretty good message for an insurance company. A message they could have conveyed on television or in print or any number of ways, but in this way, the consumer actually propelled the action. And how much more impactful is that? So pretty cool. As I said, that's that lean-back context. And we know that right now about 75% of all consumers are using multiple devices at the same time. More than 90% are using them sequentially, as you talked about earlier, right? So this is a phenomenon worth tapping into because it turns out that when you put these things together, oh, sorry, I changed the order of these. When you put these things together, as you'll see in a slide in a moment, the impact on brand effects is tremendous. We know the impact on actual conversions that we were talking about. We'll talk more about that. But one of the underappreciated things about smartphones is their power to do branding. My belief is it is precisely because they are so personal, these devices. And this is from a study from 2011, but there's no reason not to believe it's still true. In fact, I'd believe it would be more true. The average consumer takes 26 hours to report a lost wallet and takes 68 minutes to report a lost cell phone. At the beginning of last year, I was part of a conference that Business Insider conducted. And I was on a panel, and the host put up 2 slides in succession. The first was, we asked consumers how they felt about advertising on smartphones, and they said it's inappropriate. Not even that it's bad, they said it's inappropriate. The second slide was, we've studied different media and we found the single most effective advertising medium in the history of humanity is advertising on smartphones. How do you reconcile those two things? And my answer was, the answer is in the word that the consumers used. It's inappropriate because the device is so personal, because it's inside the circle of trust, and because so much advertising is spammy junk. And so it's the equivalent of getting in the consumer's house and yelling at them. It's the very opposite of what Meijer is doing by erasing a friction in your life, by creating value for you. Hence, they aren't just unhappy about it, they're offended because this is a personal device. It's physically close to me. I keep my personal information there. I do all sorts of important things there. So this was the slide I thought was coming up before. We have found that recall, reach, and frequency is all amplified and improved by putting these things together. We have found that even though that multi-screen effect is very positive, when you put all of the different media effects together, it is mobile that stands out as the most powerful brand effect. And I, again, think that most marketers understand the effect as a tool, right? This is something we shop with, we make calls, we send texts, whatever. But this brand effect is huge. We're tight on time, but I do want to tell you this story. I'm not going to claim that the new purchase funnel is 60 seconds long, but I am going to say it can be. A few months back, I was in a cab, bus drove by, bus poster, telling me about Ray Donovan. Had never heard of it, but I think Liev Schreiber is good, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I turned forward, and I kid you not, there was an ad on the taxi TV. What did I do next? I pulled out my phone and I did a search. And that search led me to their site, and while it may be a stretch to call that a purchase, I can tell you that I watched the entire season of Ray Donovan after this experience. So this is the acceleration we're dealing with now to get from a branding experience on down to a conversion. Let me quickly talk about friction. Remember when Chase was the first big bank to say, hey, just take a picture of your check and you can deposit it. You don't need to go to the bank. That erased the friction for their customers and created a heightened awareness of a friction for every other bank customer. Why can't I do that? I'm at Wells Fargo. I want to take a picture of my, right? This was brilliant on their part. One of the frictions that we experience is unoptimized websites, mobile websites. And what we find is that you do have an optimized site, there's a lot of upside. If you don't, about 4 in 10 consumers find pinching and zooming so exhausting they will leave. They also are annoyed and frustrated and unlikely to engage with your company. All bad brand effects. Now, I will hasten to say, this does not mean if you don't yet have a mobile optimized site that you should let the other 6 customers go who will hang in there for your crappy experience. But you better be prioritizing building a more positive experience for them. This is like the hair club for men thing. We are not just members or president, we're members of the club. We believe in reducing friction. Right? We created Instant Buy through Wallet to address exactly this, make it easier for people to convert on mobile devices precisely because it isn't inherently easy and because they want to do it. They're moving this way. So this is the bonus round because it isn't one of the 3 things that I said I would talk about. And forgive me for the low-res picture, but I thought it captured what I wanted to convey, which is it's critical we understand what's going on. And again, you spoke to this morning, the fact that conversions are happening, but they are invisible to us or opaque to us. That we're making assumptions, that, well, it looks like my mobile campaign is underperforming, when in point of fact, they're converting elsewhere. We know that mobile users are very valuable consumers. So it's worth investing in understanding this path. The first investment we made in this was called the Full Value of Mobile Calculator, which just identified the questions you should ask. What am I missing in terms of location clicks, in terms of phone calls, in terms of app downloads? Because all of those things are actually resulting in value to me. Adidas applied this kind of thinking when they thought they had an upside-down ROI on mobile because all they were counting was actual conversions on a mobile device. And then they said, but that just doesn't make sense. We're getting so much traffic. And they started to look at store locator clicks. And they applied some reasonable assumptions about what they knew happened when somebody came to a store. They said, well, what if we say 1 in 5 actually go to the store? We can then apply our average conversion rate, our average basket size, and guess what? It turns out that we have a very positive ROI. There's more information available on that. I'm almost out of time, but I want to make sure we talk about this. We have introduced the notion of cross-device conversions, by which we're using logged-in users to understand exactly the effect that you heard about earlier this morning, which is people who are being touched on one platform and converting on another. Critical information to understanding the effect, because it isn't just about capturing those conversions, it's about properly valuing the different opportunities. We, as an extension of that, created the estimated total conversions process, which is in our UI now, this isn't about increasing conversions in these categories. These are results from our beta partners. This is increasing visibility. It essentially means that they had been undervaluing the contributions of mobile and other platforms by 8, 7, 12%. And the risk there is that someone else actually does understand that and is beating you to the punch. You're aware of this. The big opportunity for marketers is the tremendous disconnect between what's happening with consumers and where budgets are. We will skip what's next. Well, I'll give you one what's next. Thinking about friction. Anybody have a Google Now experience? Thank you. I'm in the business. I was briefed on this. It still struck me when my phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out and I saw a card like this, and essentially it said, hey Tim, because you said it's cool for me, your device, to know these things, I read your calendar, saw your daughter Allie is flying back from UMich today, checked her flight, it's on time. Since you're cool with me knowing where you are, I mapped a route to the airport, checked the traffic. If you're gonna be there on time to pick her up, you should leave now. And there I was, a guy in the business, briefed by the guys who made this, standing over my phone going, whoa. And that's the ultimate step. What is less friction than getting you a really good answer to your question really fast? It's anticipating the question you should have asked. The only other slide I was going to show you was a kind of future look at Google Glass, and I'll only say that that too is about removing friction. Because taking the device out of my pocket is a friction, unlocking it is a friction, opening an app is a friction. If I can just go like this, and as I'm walking around in the world, that's a fantastic experience for me. These are the takeaways. I won't read them, it just happened to you. I will say this. I'll reinforce this point, which is the big headline that we are talking to marketers about is it's not about winning in mobile. Winning in mobile is about winning. This is an undeniable factor of the future. You can't win without understanding mobile. That's the story. That's my theme song playing to sign me off. I think we're doing questions? Or
we are going to do questions, yeah.